My name is Phyllis Carter. I'm 67 years old, and I live alone in a modest little house in Pasadena, Texas. I wake up early, make my own coffee, sell pies at the market on Sundays, and talk to God every night before bed. I've been a wife, mother, grandmother, caregiver, and for a long time I thought that was enough to keep me in my children's lives. But tell me something. What happens when a mother starts to be remembered only as a wallet and not as a person? It's strange to realize that even after raising 3 children with my own hands, silence has become my most faithful company. I know I'm not the only one. There are many women on the other side of the screen who have also been forgotten, replaced by WhatsApp groups and ignored messages. That feeling of being useful, but never wanted. Do you know it? Today, I'm going to tell you what happened to me on a family trip that I paid for myself. A moment that began with hope and ended with a choice that changed everything. When they left me at the hotel without knowing anything, I made a decision. And on that day, I was the one who surprised. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know one thing. I saw my children go up in that elevator, laughing, carrying the bags I paid for, without looking back once. I unintentionally heard my daughter-in-law say that they were finally free, as if my presence was a burden. They didn't imagine that I was right behind, nor that every room, every meal, every day there had come out of my pocket, with sacrifices that no one ever asked if I could make. But that night, in that room with a view of the sea and an empty soul, I didn't cry. I heard, I thought, and I stood up. Now, if you have also felt the pain of giving everything and being treated as a burden, if you have ever been forgotten by those who raised it with so much love, then stay here with me. Like this video, subscribe to the channel. But more than that, he gives me his company. Because to tell this story, I'm going to need strength. And knowing that there is someone on the other side, feeling along with me, already gives me the courage to continue. It was on a Tuesday afternoon that the phone rang. I was pulling a cornbread out of the oven, with the windows open and the smell of cinnamon invading my kitchen. When I saw Brandon's name on the screen, my heart even beat differently. My eldest son, he hadn't called me for weeks. I answered with a smile already sprouting before the hello. He started with that sweet, lively, almost childlike tone, as if he were going back to being that boy who came running to show me the report card at school. "Mom, do you have a minute? We had a wonderful idea here." He spoke of going back to the old days, reuniting the family, taking a few days just for us, as before. He said it was time to breathe fresh air, see the sea, relax, that I deserved it after all, that the grandchildren would love to spend time with me, and I believed it, because a mother always wants to believe. And when a child says he wants to be with you, out of love, not out of obligation, we listen with the heart, not with the judgment. He described the place with such enthusiasm. A resort in Galveston called Ocean Breeze Suites. He said it had a heated pool, full buffet, suites with a balcony facing the sea, activities for children. Everything seemed perfect. The spring break is the best time, Mom. And, look, we are organizing here, but we need the reservation to be in the name of just one person. It would be more practical if it was in your name. Then we'll reimburse you, of course. Can you do that for us? I remember that I stopped for a few seconds. It was not a small amount, but he spoke so fast, with so much affection, that he didn't even give me time to think too much. He said that I was the most trusted person in the family, that everyone agreed that the ideal name was mine. And there, at that moment, I felt view, included, as if for a moment he was still part of something. Agreed. I nodded even though I was alone at the kitchen counter. Of course, son, you can leave it to me. Little did I know that that yes was going to cost so much, and I'm not talking about money. At the end of the call, he thanked me in a way that dismantled me. "We love you, Mom. It's going to be special." I stared at the phone for a few minutes after the call ended. That made me think about how many times our love comes like this. Beautiful promises that our soul wants to believe, even when our hearts are calloused. And that's when I need to pause just a moment and ask you who are listening to me. Have you ever felt grateful just for being remembered? Have you ever given your all just to be part of something? If this has ever happened to you, comment below with an "I believe" or "I've lived it." It shows me that I am not alone in this memory. Well, the next day I woke up early and went after the reserve. I called the hotel, researched everything, checked every detail. The attendant, a very nice girl named Kelly, explained the packages to me. 5 rooms for 7 days with full food was just over $4,000. I hesitated, but took a deep breath. I told her that I would confirm everything by Friday. That night, I stared at the papers scattered on the kitchen table. Invoices, statements, notebooks. I didn't have that easy money, but I thought, it's only until they reimburse me. They will reimburse me, of course they will. It's my family, my children, my grandchildren, and I, as I always did, was going to find a way. But there was something in Brandon's tone, something that now, looking back, gives me a shiver on the back of my neck, an exaggerated lightness, a rehearsed sweetness, as if he knew I wasn't going to deny it, like he was sure I would. And he was right. I did. But what he didn't know, it's just that I also listen. And above all, I remember. But do you know what hurt the most? It wasn't having paid. It was realizing that, for them, I was just the name that served in the reserve. The old trusted woman. The one who signs, who pays, who doesn't ask. And at that moment, I still thought that it was all love. I still believed. But something there was already beginning to bother him. And I should have heard that discomfort, because what was to come, it was much worse. Can you imagine what else happened after that? When I entered the hotel's website and finalized the calculations with Kelly, I realized the size of the commitment I had made. 5 suites, 7 days, food included, fees and taxes, $4,680. I looked at the retirement statement and had to laugh, not of joy, but of that empty laugh of someone who has already understood that she will have to fend for herself, as she always did. I knew I didn't have that money, but I also knew that, for my children, everything was going to happen as if it were simple. Brandon would get there with the kids running. Melissa would take pictures. David would complain about the heat. Tasha would order drinks. And no one would ask what I had to give up to be there with them. And you know what? I didn't want them to ask. I just wanted to be a part of it. To be remembered, be loved. That same week, I took the bus to Houston with a velvet box inside my bag. I arrived at the old jewelry store where my husband, Raymond, and I bought our rings 42 years ago. The attendant didn't ask much. He just weighed, looked, evaluated. $750. I can make the deposit today. I signed the paper with a trembling hand. Not out of regret, but for everything that ring represented. I was selling the only material thing that still connected me to a time when someone took care of me. But I did it for my children, for the idea of family. For that smiling photo I imagined taking with everyone together on the sand. I completed the rest with what I had gathered over 9 months of selling pies at the market. Apple pie with walnut, sour cherry, pecan pie with molasses. I made each one carefully, sewed red bows by hand, smiled at the customers, thanked each coin and change. And I kept the money in an envelope hidden in the back of the closet, between the winter bedspreads. I didn't tell anyone. Not for my sister, not for the women in the church. It was my secret. My way of saying, I still can. And also, they still need me. To close the month's accounts, I scratched the market. I started buying simpler foods. Rice and beans, eggs, flour. No meat, no fresh fruit. I dropped the expensive coffee and went back to the cloth strainer. At night, I turned off the heater and slept with coats piled up on the bed. I remembered the times when Raymond and I were cold in the garage converted into a bedroom, trying to save up to buy our first house. It is curious how, in old age, we experience deprivations that should already be overcome. But love justifies a lot. In group conversations, on the family's WhatsApp, they talked about the trip with enthusiasm. They chose the children's bikinis, posted photos of the hotel, marked the days on the calendar with palm tree emojis. None of them asked how I was coping with everything. They just said, "Everything is fine with the reservation, right, Mom?" And I replied, "Yes, you can rest assured," because that's what I knew how to do. Keep everyone calm, even when I myself was sinking. There was one night in particular, a cold Thursday. It was 9 degrees, and the wind was cutting through the window. I wrapped myself in my thin blanket, held a cup of warm tea with both hands, and stared at the empty envelope. The money from the reserve had already been transferred, all paid for, everything confirmed. And there, alone in that silent room, with no one to ask me how my day was, I understood something that hurt more than the cold. I was paying, alone, for a collective happiness that might not even be mine. She was financing the joy of others, without being invited to be part of it for real. But still, I wanted to go. I wanted to see my grandchildren playing in the pool. I wanted to see Melissa smile without irony. I wanted to hear Brandon say, "Thank you, Mom." Is that it? A thank you. I would have slept hot for weeks just with that word. And it was in this thought that something began to move inside me. A discomfort. A question I always avoided asking. Do they really love me? Or do they only put up with me because I'm useful? Is my presence desired? Or just tolerated? I never had the courage to answer that. But that night, between the smell of dust and the silence of the fridge, I almost heard a voice telling me, "Phyllis, open your eyes. Have you ever felt this way? As if your presence is invisible until someone needs you? As if they only remember your name when there is a bill to pay, a hand to reach, a favor to ask? If that feeling has ever touched your chest, even once, stay with me, because what happened after that, it was not just a response. It was a revelation. And you won't believe what I discovered. The day of the trip dawned cloudy, but inside me there was sunshine. I groomed myself carefully. I put on a blue knitted blouse that Raymond liked, put on my pearl necklace, and made a bun well fastened, like in my youth. When Brandon honked in front of the house, I had been sitting on the couch for half an hour, my hands sweating inside my bag. I got into the car with a ready smile, but I was greeted by silence. Melissa, in the front seat, couldn't take her eyes off her phone. The grandchildren, stuck in the headphones, did not even raise their heads. Brandon hurriedly said, "Hi, Mom," and asked if I had brought proof of the reservation. I tried to start a conversation. I commented that the weather was closing in, that it might rain in the afternoon. No one answered. Only the sound of the GPS filled the car, and me, there in the middle, feeling like a shadow sitting among people who carry my blood. But it seems that he forgot my name. We arrived at the hotel around noon. Ocean Breeze Suites was even nicer in person. The palm trees danced in the wind. The reception was scented with lavender, and there was a pianist playing softly in the corner. As I approached the counter, the receptionist smiled widely. "Welcome, Mrs. Carter. You are our main guest." My heart filled with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Recognition. She handed me the room cards and thanked me for the reservation. That was the only time anyone addressed me enthusiastically that day. I smiled, turned my face away with the desire to share that small joy with my family, but they had already crossed the lobby. I saw Brandon pressing the elevator button impatiently, Melissa with her hand on the back of one of the boys, David laughing at something on his phone, Tasha complaining about the temperature. No one waited for me. No one looked to see if I needed help with the bags. And there, for the first time on the trip, I felt a squeeze, a chest discomfort that I didn't want to name yet, but someone noticed. Emily, my oldest granddaughter, was a few steps behind the group. When she saw that I was standing alone, holding the cards and the suitcase, she came back. He gave me a silent hug and took one of the bags. "Let's go together, Grandma," she said. And that gesture, he held me whole. The elevator went up slowly. Emily pressed the button on our floor and tried to strike up a conversation. He talked about school, the books he was reading, his plans for college. I wanted to hold her in my arms like when I was little, but I restrained myself. We reached the 5th floor. My room was 512. When I opened the door, I was surprised. A large suite, plush bed, sea view, balcony with sun loungers. It was beautiful. It was expensive. It was everything I wanted it to be, for them. Emily helped me unpack. He had a contained joy in his eyes, as if he also carried a certain discomfort inside him. Before leaving, she told me quietly, "If you need me, just call. I'm going to stay at 514. That was kept in my heart, and the silence of the others was also left. There was no invitation to go down to the pool. There was no plan for family dinner. The afternoon passed dragged, with the distant sound of laughter coming from the outside area. I watched from the balcony with a cup of tea in my hands, while my name was not remembered. When I went down on my own later, the lady at the restaurant asked, "Are you with the Carter group?" I said yes. She guided me to a large but empty table. "Your family has already had dinner earlier. They asked not to wait for her because they were hungry." I nodded, sat. I ate slowly, and it was there, with the spoon trembling between my fingers, that the discomfort became certainty. I had been brought, but not invited. I was the facilitator, the reserve, the name on the invoice, the signature on the card, and everything that hurt me. It was not new. I just didn't want to pretend I didn't see anymore. But there was still something I didn't know, something that would turn that trip into an open wound. Because the next day, I would find out what they really thought of me, and what they were plotting behind my back. Are you prepared to hear what I've heard? Because that I will never forget. On the second day, I woke up early. The sun was still shy on the horizon, and the sea breeze came in softly through the crack in the balcony. I made my coffee with the sachet I brought from home, and watched the waves, trying to convince my heart that it was all still a gift. But, deep down, something had already changed. The way they looked at me, the way they avoided me, as if I were an uncomfortable detail in the landscape. Still, I dressed neatly, straightened my hair, put on perfume. I wanted to be ready for whatever came. It didn't take long for one of those angels that life sends at the right times knocked on my door. My granddaughter Emily. She entered with the usual calm manner, but the look more serious than usual. She sat on the edge of the bed, looked around as if she feared being heard, and took her cell phone out of her pocket. "Grandma, there's one thing you need to see." I didn't even imagine what it could be. I thought it was a funny photo or a video of the boys playing. But no, it was a WhatsApp group. The name hit me like a slap. Spring break without drama. Brandon's creation. Participants: Melissa, David, Tasha. Even the teenagers were there. I stared at the screen without understanding at first. Emily scrolled the messages slowly, as if she had read that before and didn't know how to show me. The conversations were jokes, laughter, comments that made me freeze. If the old woman wants company, send her to ask for room service. Just don't forget to use her card, Lowell. Someone has to pretend to invite her to dinner. Then we transfer the rooms, leave everything in our name and say that it was a mistake by the reception. She won't even notice. I read each line as if sinking into the sand, without ground, without air. It was the kind of evil that doesn't scream, but hurts more than any slap. It wasn't just ingratitude. It was mockery. I was not welcome. It was a laughing matter. Emily didn't say anything. He was just waiting for my reaction. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and said what my heart could babble at that moment. I get it. Because that's what I felt. That I had finally understood. It was not an exaggeration. It was not an impression. It was not a drama of a needy mother. They really saw me as a nuisance. A shadow that serves to sign what they don't want to pay. And at that moment, sitting there on the edge of the bed in room 512, something inside me broke. And it wasn't sadness. It was lucidity. Emily hugged me. I asked her not to comment anything for now. He said he needed to think. She left in silence, teary-eyed. I was alone for hours. The cheerful voices of the pool came muffled through the window. They were downstairs, toasting, laughing, wearing the colorful, all-inclusive bracelets that I paid for. And I was there, with his heart shattered, but his head starting to put the pieces together. And I'm here opening my heart, telling my story with all the pains and memories I carry. If you're listening to me, leave a like on this video. Subscribe to the channel. I still have so much stored in here. Things that may touch your heart too. Sometimes, all we need is to know that someone has heard. That night I didn't go to dinner. I ordered soup in the room, and with each spoonful, I swallowed my pain. But I swore to myself, this trip was not going to end like the others. I wasn't going to go home with my head down and my shoulders heavy. Not this time. Something began to move inside me. Something I couldn't name myself. But it was coming. And when the third day came, he was the one who showed up in my room. Brandon, with a sweet smile on her lips, and a new suggestion. Can you guess what he wanted now? That night, after Brandon knocked on the door with that rehearsed smile and soft voice saying that he needed to talk about the names on the reservations, as if I were a secretary, not his mother. I just nodded. I didn't confront it. I didn't show that I knew. He just said, "We'll see that later, son. Now I'm a little tired." He smiled, relieved, and left as if he had just solved another detail of the trip. But when I closed the door, weakness in my legs forced me to sit on the edge of the bed. The room was dark. The moonlight was pouring in through the cracks in the curtain, and the sound of the waves outside seemed too far away. I grabbed my pillow and hugged it tightly, as if it were someone, and I stayed there, quiet. I cried without sound, as I have done so many times in my life. But this time, along with the tears, came the memories. I saw myself again at the age of 32, sewing in the kitchen light, while the boys slept on the borrowed mattress. I spent the night patching school uniforms because I couldn't afford new ones. I remembered the time my ankle swelled from scrubbing someone else's floors, and I still went to work, because Brandon needed to pay for a science class and David had a fever. I remembered the day I sold the mahogany cabinet in the living room, the only beautiful piece of furniture Raymond and I had bought together, to cover Tasha's college tuition. I told her it was a gift, and she cried. They never paid me back. I was never asked if I regretted it. But no, I didn't regret it. Not at the time, because doing it for them gave me meaning. Our love does not come with a receipt. We give it, and that's it. But in that hotel bed, with my body hurting more than my soul, I realized one thing. It wasn't about money. It never was. It was about being erased, about having been necessary, but never celebrated. I was the foundation, the backdrop, the ladder for everyone to climb. And now I was just a useful name, an old woman with a card, a piece that can be moved around on the board as long as no one has to look me in the eye. I remembered little Brandon, sitting on my lap with that disheveled hair, saying, "When I grow up, I'm going to take care of you, Mommy. You're my best friend." I kept every word. I remembered how he wrote notes and left them under my pillow. "You're my hero. I'll never leave you alone." I believed it. And in a way, I still believe that somewhere in there, he feels something. But life, the bills, the selfishness and the shortcuts were swallowing that boy. And what remained was a man who learned to take advantage of love without giving love back. The clock has passed 2 a.m. I walked to the balcony and stared at the sea. The wind ruffled my hair, and my eyes burned. I thought of Raymond. If he had been there, he would have put a blanket over my shoulders and said, "Phyllis, you're worth more than that." And maybe that was the problem. No one else told me that. Neither do they. Not even myself. On that porch, I understood that everything I had given, sleepless nights, back pain, skipped dinners, postponed dreams, never turned into gratitude. It has become a convenience. They got used to the idea that I would always be there, paying, solving, giving in. And so, when I needed to be loved back, they didn't know how. Not because they were not capable, but because it was never required. I gave myself entirely, and now I was just a shadow of what I once was. And it was at that moment, between the sound of the waves and the salty taste of the memory, that I understood. It was not just a trip. It was a portrait. It was the reflection of everything I never wanted to see. And the worst was yet to come. Because the next day I heard something that tore me inside, something that no mother deserves to hear. And it was there that my decision began to take shape. Would you have done it differently? Or would he have done exactly what I did? The next morning, the sun came in through the window, but it didn't warm anything up here. I woke up with a wet pillow, a heavy body, and a head full of questions that only hurt more when silence answered them. I got up slowly, took a shower, arranged the room as I always did, even though I knew someone would come to fix it later. An old habit of those who have spent their entire lives cleaning up what others have left behind. The room was a charm. Large bed, Egyptian cotton sheet, fresh flowers in the bathroom, fluffy towels, and a balcony facing the sea. Everything paid for by me, but none of it felt mine. It was as if I had been placed there as an expensive piece of furniture, present, but not necessary. I went to the balcony with a cup of tea. The pool was already full. I saw Melissa in a white hat, posing for photos with her children. Brandon by the pool, holding a colorful drink, laughing loudly. Tasha with his feet in the water, David making videos for Instagram. A propaganda scenario. Perfect American family on spring break. And I, a few meters away, invisible. No one looked up. No one asked where I was, if I had slept well, if I wanted to have coffee with them. I, who helped each one to stand up, was now forgotten even when it came to smiling for a photo. I went back inside, sat in the armchair, and turned on the TV just to hear some sound. I didn't pay attention to what was going on. The noise served to muffle what was screaming inside. That feeling of being a forgotten piece of a puzzle that I put together with so much care myself. A piece that no longer matches the design that others are trying to form. And there, sitting in that room too beautiful for the amount of sadness I felt, I realized that luxury does not fill absence. The sight does not console contempt. and the king-size bed only looks bigger when you lie alone on it. I spent the day quietly. Emily appeared around 4 in the afternoon, knocking lightly on the door. I brought a cake from the buffet, said I had missed it at the cafe. I thanked him, but I didn't eat. She wanted to stay, but I asked her to enjoy it with her cousins. I knew that if she stayed, someone would scold her for it, and I didn't want to put weight on her back. She left reluctantly, and I stared at the tray with the cake for hours, not daring to throw it away. At night, I didn't go downstairs. I ordered soup through room service. When the girl brought the tray, I noticed that there were 2 plates, 2 spoons. "Sorry, it must have been our mistake," she said. But I said no, that I could leave it. She left, and I sat down at the 2-seater table. I ate slowly, with trembling hands, feeling each tablespoon of broth as a reminder that someone was supposed to be there with me, that there should be a conversation, a laugh, a question about my day. But what there was only the sound of the spoon scraping the bottom of the plate, and loneliness dressed in fine porcelain. It's curious how sometimes we do so much for others that we forget to do it for ourselves, and when they stop needing, we don't even know where to put our own presence anymore. It's not anger, no. It is deeper than that. It's as if you look in the mirror and no longer see function, not even a place. It was there, in that beige upholstered chair, with the sound of the TV in the background, that I asked myself, how long will I accept being forgotten by those I never forgot? If you're still here with me, listen to me well. The hardest part has not yet been told. I'm not here just to vent. I'm here because in that hotel, in room 512, I discovered something that changed everything. It was not a conversation. It wasn't a scream. It was a low sound, a loose sentence that cut deeper than any offense, because there are things that we hear once and never forgets. And that's what I'm going to tell you in the next part. Have you ever imagined hearing from your own child's mouth that you are just a convenient burden? That's that. I didn't imagine it either, until that moment. The next morning I woke up different. Not better, not worse, only clearer, as if, after so long being the sea, I had turned to stone, not hardened by anger, but shaped by the repetition of pain. The cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Brandon. "Let's have lunch on the beach. If you want, ask for room service." Is that it? No good morning? No. Will you come with us? No real invitation. It was as if I were any other guest. A lateral presence. A shadow allowed, as long as it was silent. I faced that phrase as if looking at a thorn. In other times, I would have responded with a little heart or with a, "Okay, my loves." But that day, something in me decided to stop. I didn't answer. Instead, I called the bank. The attendant, very helpful, listened to my report carefully. I said I could leave an active alert on my card, and that any unusual attempt to use it would be notified to me immediately. I thanked him. He said he suspected an attempt at misuse, which for me was not a lie. It was just a precaution. Afterwards, I called the hotel management. I asked that any change in the names of the reservations, any transfer of rooms or change of ownership, could only be done with my physical presence and my document. The manager, a polite man, confirmed that he would write everything down in the system, and so I did what I had so often postponed for fear of seeming suspicious. I protected myself. I hung up the phone with cold hands, but my chest warm. Not out of revenge, but out of self-love. For the first time in a long time, I made a decision with myself in mind, not the well-being of others. And that's when I began to understand a truth that no one teaches us, but that life forces us to face. There are times when loving also means setting limits, and that protecting herself, it is also a way of caring. You know, there's a moment in our lives when the silence starts screaming. Scream for respect, for space, for dignity. And when we hear this scream, there is no longer any way to pretend not to hear. If this makes sense to you, comment here with an "I understand you" or a "it's true," just so I know I'm not talking to myself. At the end of the afternoon, I calmly got ready. I put on a light outfit, put on burgundy lipstick, and went to the hotel restaurant with my head held high. When I entered, I saw that the family's large table was almost full. They saw me, yes, but they didn't say anything right away. Only the daughters-in-law exchanged glances. They sat down a little straighter. Melissa straightened her hair. Tasha pulled her napkin into her lap. Brandon let out a, "Hi, Mom," with that tone that mixes guilt and surprise. I just smiled slightly and sat at the end of the table. I ordered my plate in a firm voice, looked at the menu carefully, thanked the waiter with kindness. I didn't ask any questions. I didn't beg for attention. I just existed, with dignity. During dinner, they talked to each other, but the looks came to me from time to time, trying to decipher what had changed, and I let them look, because sometimes the greatest response is silence, a silence that is no longer submission, but choice. Brandon tried to start a conversation. He spoke of the boat trip the next day. I just replied, "I don't know if I will. I have other plans." He froze for a second, as if he didn't know how to deal with the idea that I could have a will of my own. And there, at that moment, I saw the discomfort settle in. They realized that the Phyllis they were used to, it was no longer there, but they still didn't know what I was preparing. And when the truth came out, they would understand, in a way they would never forget. Because, sometimes, justice does not scream. It just imposes itself. You can imagine what happened when they arrived at the reception the next day. And they tried what they shouldn't? After dinner, when everyone went up to their rooms, Brandon stayed behind. I was already entering the elevator when I felt his hand touching my arm with a false lightness. "Can we talk for a minute, Mom?" I nodded with a small gesture. We walk in silence to an emptier corridor, away from the gaze of others. He looked around, as if he were about to commit a secret act, and then stared at me with a tense countenance. "You called the bank, right? And for the hotel too, Melissa told me." I didn't say anything. I just kept my gaze. He continued, now more angry. "Look, if you do that, if you continue with this little theater, nothing will be the same as before in this family." And that's when I finally responded, in a low, firm, and calm voice. "But it is no longer." He looked at me as if he had been slapped, and maybe that's what it was. Not a slap on the skin, but on the soul, on the pride, on the control he thought he still had over me. I turned around and got into the elevator alone. He stood there, trying to digest what he heard, and at that moment, something inside me collapsed for good, not out of sadness, but out of tiredness. An old, deep tiredness, of someone who has held the world on his shoulders for years, only to be dismissed as a system error. I returned to my room in silence. Every step to the door felt heavier. I went in, locked it calmly, and went straight to the closet. I opened the doors and started folding my clothes. One by one, the dresses that I chose with affection for this trip. The blue with a flower print, the olive green that Raymond said matched my eyes. I kept the perfume, the sandals, the simple jewels. I took my mother's pearl necklace and wrapped it in tissue paper. I sat on the edge of the bed, looked at the room around, as if saying goodbye, not only to space, but from a part of me. I took a sheet of those from the notebook that the hotel leaves on the desk. I wrote in my slow but firm handwriting. I was not made to beg for presents, and I folded slowly, as if sealing a secret. I kept it inside my Bible, between the marked pages of Psalm 34. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't make drama. I just sat there, listening to the muffled noise of the TV and the ticking of the clock on the nightstand. Time passing, reality falling. It was that night that I understood that what I had lost was not just money, nor respect. I had lost the illusion, the idea that it was still necessary, that it was enough to love a lot to be loved back, that the time spent together was enough to keep the bonds alive. It was not enough, not for them. And when you lose the illusion, everything around it seems like a lie. The happy memories, the photo albums, the old Christmases, the children's notes, everything starts to have a different taste, a bittersweet taste of, was it ever real? I didn't have that answer, but I knew that, from then on, I would no longer live trying to find it. That night, I left the porch light on. I slept with the window ajar, as I did in ancient times. When little Brandon said that, so the angels could come in, I slept on my side, hugging the Bible and the sheet with my sentence written on it. And I dreamed of an empty field, a silent place, where no one called me, but where no one ignored me either. It was peace. It was pain. It was real. And little did I know that the next morning would bring something even more unexpected, a visit that would change the course of my decision. Do you think that a woman like me, after all, can still surprise her own children? Well, I was about to prove that it was, and in the most elegant way possible. That morning, I opened my eyes before the sun even touched the window. It was early in a way that the world still seemed silent, suspended. I put a coat over my pajamas, put on my slippers, and left. The hotel corridor was empty. The elevator went down by itself, and when I stepped on the sand on the beach, the sky was still a dark blue cloth, with a shy wisp of orange on the horizon. I walked slowly, feeling the cold rise up to my ankles, the damp grains sticking to my feet. That loneliness, which until yesterday hurt as an absence, suddenly seemed freedom. For the first time in a long time, I didn't have to smile out of obligation. He didn't need to please anyone. I was just me, and I was enough. I stopped near the water, let the waves lick my fingers. I stood there, breathing. I remembered when, years ago, Raymond took me to Galveston for the first time. We slept in a simple inn, with a noisy fan and a bed of springs jumping. And even so, it was one of the happiest days of my life, because he looked at me, he heard me, he wanted me there. And now, in that very place, I was invisible to those who were born of me. But at that moment I didn't cry, because something in me had awakened. The silence of room 512 was no longer a prison. It was seed. They underestimated me. They put me in a small role, thinking that, with age, I had forgotten who I am. But I remembered, and I remembered it strongly, because a woman like me doesn't disappear. She waits, she observes, and when he decides, it acts. I returned to the room slowly. I took my little notebook with a blue cover, the one I always carry in my purse. I sat at my desk and began to write. I wrote down the dates, the phrases I heard, the names. Spring break without drama, group created on March 15th. Don't forget to use her card, written by David. The attempt to change the names of the reservation. The conversation with Brandon in the hallway. The evidence was there. And more than proof, that was the portrait of my story. That of a woman who supported everyone, and in the end, was treated as a burden. But not anymore. There was going to be no scandal, not even screaming. The justice I wanted was another. It was the one that is done in silence, but that echoes for years. And they were going to feel it. They will feel it. If this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, help me carry it forward. Like and subscribe here to the channel. This makes more difference than you think, because there are many women on the other side who have also been forgotten, and perhaps my voice will help others to find their own again. I closed the notebook. I kept it inside the suitcase. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and folded my hands on my lap. An idea was already beginning to take shape. I just needed the right moment. And he was coming. Can you imagine what happens when the old woman who everyone thinks is fragile starts moving steadily? Well, that's exactly what happened when Friday came, the eve of the end of the trip, and they didn't even imagine. On Thursday morning, as they slept late after the night of laughter in the jacuzzi, I was already up, coffee down, with my hair tied up in a low bun, and the Bible in my purse. My heart was serene, and this was perhaps the clearest sign that I was ready. Not to fight, not to humiliate, but to protect myself. And more than that, to show that I wasn't as fragile as they thought. With the little blue notebook in my hands, and silence as a shield, I began my little revolution. First thing, I called the bank again. This time, I asked for a formal process of possible fraud to be opened in my name. I clarified that all bookings at the Ocean Breeze Suites Resort were linked solely to my card, and that any attempt to transfer financial responsibility should be treated as suspicious. The attendant was polite and attentive. She gave me the protocol number, confirmed that my alert was active, and promised to keep me informed of any movement. I wrote everything down. The conversation didn't last more than 15 minutes, but it was enough for me to feel that, this time, they wouldn't catch me off guard. Then I went to the reception. I asked to speak to the manager, Miguel Henderson. Young, but with the eyes of someone who has seen guests of all kinds. He received me in a glass-enclosed room, overlooking the pool where Brandon and Melissa, at that very moment, were sunbathing without knowing anything. I told him my situation, without drama, without tears. I spoke clearly, slowly. I said I had reason to believe that my family would try to modify the reservation data so that the final cost would not fall on them. Miguel listened respectfully, took some notes on the computer, and at the end, shook my hand saying, "Mrs. Carter, rest assured. From now on, Any change can only be made with your written authorization and physical presence. I'll take care of it myself personally." And he looked at me with a firmness that gave me peace. A man who understood that the name of a woman who paid for everything in silence is not to be trifled with. I went back to the room, took a hot shower, put on some light clothes, and took my cell phone. I opened the calendar and looked up a number I hadn't dialed in years. Jenkins and Carter Law, the firm of my late husband, Raymond. It was there that he worked for more than 30 years, as a junior partner at first, then as a consultant until illness overcame him. "Called," the secretary answered, and when I mentioned my name, her voice changed. Within minutes, I was transferred directly to Mr. Jenkins. Still alive, still lucid, with that same hoarse voice of an old cigarette and hidden tenderness. "Phyllis Carter? But what a pleasure to hear your voice after so long. How are you, my dear?" "Fighting not to let them erase my story, Mr. Jenkins. Tell me what you need." I told him everything, from the group of messages, from the reservations, from the averted looks, from the misuse of my name. I told them about the sale of the ring, the pies sold standing with back pain, the room where I was not called, but which I paid for with sweat, and he listened to me. At the end, he paused for a long time and said, "They messed with the wrong person, Phyllis." He promised to email me a notification template that I could use if necessary, and made himself available to formalize any further action. I thanked him with a lump in my throat, but without letting the tear fall, because at that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a while: control. I had ceased to expect consideration. Now, I had a strategy. You know, sometimes we spend so much time being useful, being support, being ground, who forgets that he can also be a wall, who also has the strength to say enough. And the most curious thing is that, when we get up calmly, elegantly, those who were used to stepping begin to stumble. There is a part of my story that I have not yet told, and you'll want to hear it. Because what I did on the penultimate day of the trip, no one expected it. And to this day, they remember. Because it was on that day that the tables turned. And I turned the tables in silence. Would you be ready to do the same? That afternoon, I was already with a firm soul as someone who knows what he has to do. But something pushed me back to the past. I called Mr. Jenkins again, to ask a simple question about an old life insurance policy that was still in my name. Nothing much. But what he brought me back was much more than an answer. As we talked, he said carefully, "Phyllis, I've been going through some old Raymond papers and found something that maybe you should know. I think this story of the trip, it's not the first time." My heart stopped for a second, and he continued. "There were records of 2 bank transfers made years ago in Brandon's name. Huge amounts, more than $10,000 each, that came directly from a joint account of me and Raymond. I didn't remember that. Jenkins emailed the scanned documents. When I opened it, I felt butterflies in my stomach. There it was, my signature, but in a crooked line, without my curved M, without the L with a bow. It wasn't mine. It was counterfeit. I asked him to look deeper. He called me back at night. "Phyllis, there's more. He has a loan in his name made in 2018, in the amount of $27,000, with co-responsibility signed by David. It was never paid. It is paid off with funds from an account that was closed shortly thereafter. It seems that they used his name to get credit, and then cleaned up the tracks." I hung up the phone with cold hands. It was as if, suddenly, all the smiles, all the birthday hugs, all the "thank you for everything, Mom," collapsed like a rotten house of cards inside. And that's when the penny dropped. That trip, that contempt, that use and discard, was not an accident. It was a pattern. They had used me before. They had taken advantage of my good faith, my blind trust, my motherly love, that she never imagined that her own children could choose the path of selfishness. The trip was only the first time they had done this explicitly, but behind the scenes, it had been happening for years. And I, with my apron tied around my waist, selling pies at the market, and lighting candles for my grandchildren, never noticed. I sat on the floor of the room, near the suitcase still open, and cried, not like before. This time, it wasn't just sadness. It was mourning. Mourning for a mother who believed that love was enough. I mourn for a woman who has spent her whole life being the port, and that he now understood that some ships only dock out of interest. That discovery broke me into places I didn't even know existed. And you know, there are memories that stick to us like old perfume. All it takes is a phrase, a piece of paper, an account number, and everything comes back. The smells, the sounds, the fears, and when they come back, we feel that nothing will be the same as before. If you on the other side have ever gone through something like this, or know someone who has experienced something similar, write here in the comments. Tell your memory. Sometimes, sharing a pain makes it weigh less. That night, I stood for a long time looking at the mirror, looking at me, for this 67-year-old woman who still believed that family was synonymous with protection. But it is not. Family can also hurt. And sometimes, the one who hurts the most is the one you love the most. But now I was no longer the one who accepted it in silence. I went to the end. And when the sun rose again, I already knew what I needed to do. The trip ended on Saturday. But for me, it would all start on Friday. And no one was prepared. Not even Brandon. Do you want to know what I did at the last dinner? You better get ready. Because it was in that hall facing the sea that they tasted of the poison itself. On Friday morning, I went down to the cafe earlier than everyone else. The room was still half empty. Only a few silent couples and one or two guests distracted by their cell phones. I took a cup of black coffee, some fruit, sat by the window and stared at the sea. It was no longer the same sea as when I arrived. Or maybe it was. Maybe I was the one who had changed. I finished coffee calmly, wiped my mouth on the napkin, took a deep breath and stood up. I walked to the reception as if just going to ask for more towels. But inside me, I knew. That's where my story turned. Miguel, the manager, was standing behind the counter, talking quietly to an employee. When he saw me, he smiled respectfully. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter." I smiled back serenely. "Good morning, Miguel. Can we talk for a moment, please?" He led me to that same glass room as before. He closed the door, offered me a chair, and asked gently, "What can I help with?" I took out of my bag the blue notebook and a folded paper. I placed them both on the table carefully. "Miguel, I think it's time for me to adjust this trip so that it matches reality. I want to cancel 4 of the 5 suites." He frowned, surprised. "4, ma'am?" I nodded. "Yes. I want to keep only room 512, which is mine. The others, I want to be closed in my name." He took a deep breath, clearly understanding that there was more to this than a simple change of reservation. But he did not ask why. He opened the system, confirmed my data, checked each room. The suites in the name of the lady are registered as 510, 511, 512, 513, and 514. Do you want to keep only 512? Exactly. And I added, looking him in the eye. And I want this change to come into force today. I would like that, at 10 a.m., the key cards of the other rooms stop working. And that, at 11 p.m., his team informed the occupants that the holder of the reservation withdrew the authorization to use, and that they are now responsible for finding another accommodation. He watched me in silence for a few seconds, as if measuring the firmness of the ground. "Mrs. Carter, are you absolutely sure of that?" I smiled slightly. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a smile of someone who finally recognizes himself. "Miguel, for the first time in a long time, I'm sure of something. I paid every penny of these suites believing in an idea of family that only existed within me. They left me alone, laughed at me behind my back, planned to use me and then get rid of the bill. Now, all I'm doing is giving them back the weight of their own choices." He nodded slowly, without judgment. "In this case, I will need you to sign here, formalizing your decision." He turned the monitor slightly, showed me the details. Immediate cancellation, internal policy, no additional charges beyond what was already paid. I read everything carefully, put my glasses on the tip of my nose, and signed. My handwriting seemed firmer that day. Before he got up, I added, "I have one more request. I want your team to know that if any of them come here to argue, yell, or disrespect employees, you call security. If you want to talk to me, you can go up to 512, but only if they come in peace. I'm not going to explain myself by crying anymore." Miguel took a deep breath and replied, "Understood, ma'am. We will act exactly as he asked." He wrote down instructions, sent an internal email in front of me, called the IT sector to schedule the blocking of the cards at 10 o'clock. I stood there, watching everything with a calm that almost scared me. It was not revenge. It was limit. It was as if I said to myself, "Enough, Phyllis. No more cringing." I left that room light. I passed by the pool area. They were there, as always. Melissa stretched out on the lounger. David talking loudly, Tasha with her cell phone in her hand, Brandon in the water braving with one of the grandchildren. No one noticed my footsteps. No one imagined that the ground beneath them was about to change. I sat for a while in a corner armchair, pretended to read a hotel pamphlet and looked at the clock discreetly. It was less than an hour away. I thought about my whole life, in all the times I let it go to avoid fighting, in all the swallowed sentences, the thanks that never came, the birthdays spent at home, alone, waiting for at least one visit. And there, in that borrowed piece of sun, I understood that old age did not take away my strength. It only took away the fear of losing those who were no longer with me. I went up to my room just before 10. I opened the balcony, let the wind in, sat in the armchair overlooking the sea, and waited. When the digital clock on the nightstand struck 10 a.m., I could almost feel a crack in the air. Downstairs, they were still laughing, going in and out of the pool, not knowing that the next time they tried to go up to the rooms, the cards would become useless pieces of plastic. And incredible as it may seem, I didn't feel pleasure in it. It was not a childish, well done. It was something else. It was like putting a mirror in front of someone and saying, look what you did. I kept imagining the scene. Melissa with wet hair, going up in the elevator, trying to open the bedroom door and nothing. Brandon, annoyed, going down to complain at the reception. David joking until he realized it was not funny at all. And the grandchildren, poor things, not understanding why the adults were so upset. A part of me hurt for them, not for my children, or the grandchildren. But I knew that if I went back, I would be betraying the one person I should never have abandoned, myself. While waiting, I leaned my head against the armchair and closed my eyes for a moment. I felt a mixture of fear and liberation, fear of the reaction, the scolding, the accusations, liberation for finally having done something for me, and not in spite of me. And there, with the distant noise of the children in the pool and the sea crashing down below, I thought, they will never look at me the same way again. But what I couldn't imagine, that's what they were going to say when they knocked on my bedroom door, with their eyes on fire and the dead cards in their hands. Can you hear the sound of this beat? Because it was there, at the door of 512, that the real conversation began. At 10:02 a.m., even with the door closed and the silence of room 512 around me, I felt it. I don't know how to explain it. I didn't hear anything. I didn't see anything, but I felt it. It was as if the air in the hotel had changed temperature, as if a truth had finally touched the face of those who have spent their lives pretending not to see it. I slowly got up from the armchair, walked to the balcony and stood there, looking at the sea, while their world began to crumble 2 floors below. It didn't take even 5 minutes for the first signal to arrive. The glass door to the pool opened forcefully, and I saw Anna, her bikini still dripping, walking fast toward the elevators, fiddling with the keycard impatiently. She got into the elevator, went up, and he did not return. Later, I saw Brandon doing the same, leaving the pool with the towel on his shoulder, entering the elevator with a frown, trying to hide his anger before he even knew what. When the phone in my room vibrated insistently, I didn't answer. It was the first time in my life that I had chosen my silence before their anxiety. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the muffled sound of hurried footsteps in the hallway. A second touch, then another, and then silence, only the wind hitting the window lightly. I took a sip of the glass of water and leaned my head against the wall, imagining the scene. Anna standing at the door of the room, swiping the card once, twice, 3 times, the electronic noise denying it. She looked to the sides, trying to keep her composure, calling Brandon on his cell phone, and he probably replied angrily, "Wait a minute, I'm already going up." But it was no use. Not for him, not for David, not for Melissa. The doors would not open. No more. My phone vibrated again. This time, a message. It was Mariana, my granddaughter. "Grandma, is something going on? The room does not open. They are very angry." I felt a twinge in my chest when I saw her name. The only one who always saw me, who sat next to me without haste, who asked me if I was okay when no one else asked. I replied calmly, "Don't be alarmed, dear. I'm just taking back what's mine." She typed something quickly, but deleted it before sending. Then came another message. "Do you want me to go up there?" I closed my eyes for a moment. Oh, how I wanted. But it was not time. Not yet. "Stay close, my love." But wait, it's going to be okay. At 10:20 a.m., the confusion began to grow. I heard the noise coming from the lobby. Loud voices, hurried footsteps, the clinking of key rings, and the firm tone of the staff trying to maintain order. I got up and went to the door. I put my ear to it. Nothing specific, just a loud murmur, like a bothered hive. My name, I am sure, was repeated in an accusatory tone more than once. I didn't open the door. I didn't get off. I didn't introduce myself. For the first time, I let them look for me, instead of me running to fix everything. Meanwhile, downstairs, the reception fulfilled exactly what I asked. There was a change in the reservation made by the holder. Only Mrs. Carter can authorize access to the rooms. I heard, through delayed messages from the family group, which I had never joined, that David blushed, that Melissa tried to raise her voice with an employee, that Brandon repeated several times, "That must be a mistake." But the hotel did not back down. Firm, polite, professional, as I asked. I walked to the balcony and watched from afar as they walked around the courtyard with a face of incredulity, as if they did not understand that decisions have consequences, as if they had never imagined that this woman who spent her whole life saving their days could just refuse. There, watching my sons and daughters-in-law walking in circles, I realized that I was not expelling anyone. I was only giving back the abandonment they cultivated. They chose not to share the trip with me. They chose to leave me alone. I only accepted their choice. This time, officially. At 10:45 a.m., Mariana sent another message. "Dad is furious. He says he's going to go upstairs in his room." I breathed slowly, like someone who receives a breeze before the storm. "He can go up," I replied, "but only if you hit it calmly." And then, close to 11, I heard heavy footsteps climbing the emergency stairs. The elevator was probably too slow for their haste. The wood of the corridor crackled under the impact. Someone's rapid breathing, Brandon, perhaps, echoed before they even got close. I closed the balcony door, walked to the center of the room and stood, straight back, hands loose at your sides, a lifetime waiting to be heard. And now, finally, I wasn't the one who ran after it. The first knock on the door came strong. The second, even stronger. Then, silence. A silence full of teeth, full of questions, full of urgency. I took a deep breath and started walking towards the door. Each step weighed an entire story. And as the doorknob vibrated in their attempt to force their way in, all I thought was, now, yes, now they're going to have to look at me. But what Brandon said when the door finally opened, no one could have predicted that. When I finally turned the knob and opened the door, Brandon almost fell into the room. His face was red, his eyes wide, his chest rising and falling as if he had run a marathon. Behind him came David, Melissa, and Anna, each carrying a different expression, but all of them mixing panic, guilt, and indignation. The door had barely opened, and Brandon had already begun to speak too loudly for such a quiet hotel. "Mom, this is crazy. We need to talk. You can't do that to us. You can't just cut our rooms like that." I just watched. I didn't move a muscle. His despair beat against my silence, like a wave that finds nowhere to spread. David stepped forward, trying to play peacemaker. He's always had this habit. He speaks in a low voice, tries to smile to lighten the mood, as if he could wind up reality. "Mom, look, I think all of this was a misunderstanding. We were playing in that group. You know how it is. Travel, stress, lack of patience. We exaggerated, of course, but..." I raised my hand, asking for silence. He swallowed the rest of the sentence. Melissa, in turn, crossed her arms, her mouth twisted, ready to distill poison. "This is absurd, Phyllis. Are you going to destroy this family for the sake of a trip? Is that right? Are you going to put everyone on the street to pay for a hotel at the last minute? Do you have any idea what you're doing?" Her voice echoed through the room like a tear. Anna cried softly behind the three of them, trying to make herself small, as she always did. When I realized that they were waiting for me to explode, for me to scream, for me to lose control so they could call me exaggerated, I took a deep breath. I walked to the armchair, sat calmly, folded my hands in my lap, and asked, in the calmest voice God gave me, "Do you remember when was the last time you hugged me without feeling like obligation?" No one answered. Brandon looked down at his feet. Melissa snorted. David pretended to fiddle with the clock. I asked another, Do you remember the last time you asked if I was okay? Could I afford this trip? If I could afford 7 days of hotel accommodation for 5 suites? More silence. Brandon's breathing became irregular. Anna wiped her nose. Melissa rolled her eyes. The absence of their response was the best response I could have. I continued, without raising my voice. Do you know how long it took me to save the money for this trip? Do you know where every penny came from? The silence was getting heavy, uncomfortable, almost solid. You can't even imagine how many pies I sold to pay for this. How many nights have I slept without heater? How many months did I spend avoiding buying meat to fit everything into the budget? Do you know? The words came out slow, but sharp. They were like needles going into places they never wanted to look. Brandon tried to move closer, reached out to my shoulder, perhaps trying to regain an authority he should never have taken from me. But I backed off before he pulled over, not out of fear, out of respect. Respect for me. Mom, please. You're getting it all wrong. We love you. He always loved it. I smiled. It was a sad but true smile. You love when you need me. They love it when I'm paying. They love when I agree. But to love, really love, to love is something else. Melissa, impatient, stepped forward. What now? What's your plan, Phyllis? Do you think you're giving a moral lesson? Are you going to leave your own children and grandchildren without a room? Are you going to embarrass us? I faced her with a serenity that made her arrogance wither. I didn't leave anyone without a room, Melissa. You let yourselves. You took me out of the family a long time ago. I'm just rearranging things to reflect that. David tried again to intervene. Mom, all this can all be solved. We talk, apologize, straighten up. I interrupted. And when did you apologize last time? He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. It was like trying to breathe life into wet ashes, while they ran over each other in empty excuses, crooked justifications, half-truths and attempts to manipulate my sense of guilt. I just watched. For the first time, I saw my children as adults, not as innocent children I needed to protect, nor as victims of the world, but as people who have made conscious choices, people who treated me as a resource, not as a mother. My phone vibrated again. Mariana's message. Grandma, are they screaming? Is everything okay? I replied, all right, my love. Grandma is just putting things in place. This phrase seemed simple, but inside me it sounded like a rebirth. I was finally reorganizing my life, piece by piece, thread by thread. I looked at them, still there, tense, restless, waiting for my reaction as if waiting for a punishment or an easy forgiveness. And it was then that I said, with the calm of someone who finally recovers his own name, I am not destroying any family. I'm just giving you back what you gave me. Silence, indifference, distance. Brandon opened his mouth to answer, but I raised my hand once more. The conversation is not over. Not yet. But before continuing, I want you to think of one thing. I got up slowly, walked to the door, and stood before them, firm. Do you really believe that this started today? The three looked at each other, confused, tense, frightened, because what I was going to reveal in the next part, it was something none of them were prepared to hear. It was the kind of truth that changes the way a person sees their past, and they would have to face it. From my room, the midday light poured in without asking permission, illuminating every corner as if the sun itself wanted to witness what was about to happen. I stood near the balcony, holding the cup of coffee with both hands. The coffee was already cold, but I didn't have the courage to put it aside. It was almost an amulet, something to remind me that I was still there, steady, breathing, aware of what I had done and what it meant. Downstairs, in the open lobby of Ocean Breeze Suites, I could see some of the movement. Staff coming and going, guests passing by with colorful buoys, children running around with wet hair. But what really mattered wasn't what I saw. It was what I felt in the air. A kind of moral silence, almost solemn, as if the universe stopped for a moment to align what was out of place. Shortly before noon, a message from Mariana arrived. Grandma, they're packing their bags. Dad is angry, but quiet. Mom is crying. They're saying this is a shame. I took a deep breath. Shame. Funny how certain words gain different weight depending on who uses them. For them, shame was to be seen without a room. For me, shame was having been erased for a lifetime. I replied to her, "Stay calm, my love. None of this is your fault. When the clock struck 12 o'clock sharp, the hotel staff began to collect my family's bags. No pushing and shoving, no screaming. Miguel had been impeccable. 2 men from the team accompanied Brandon, David, and their wives, while a younger employee chatted calmly with the children, explaining that the rooms had been canceled by the bookholder and that the hotel could call a taxi to take them to their destination. I watched everything from above, leaning on the balcony railing, feeling my heart beat slowly, firmly, almost paced. There was no anger. There was no revenge. Had justice. The most silent, discreet, and inevitable form of justice. Brandon tried to reason with one of the employees, gesticulated, pointed to the building, looked up as if trying to guess which balcony I was on, but he did not raise his voice. He did not make a scandal. His pride did not let him, and perhaps, for the first time in his life, he was getting a taste of not being in control. Melissa spoke loudly. I could tell that from afar. The stiff posture, her hands flapping her hips, the frustration trying to escape through her mouth. But even she seemed to have understood that the situation was irreversible. David was standing with his hands in his pockets, head bowed. He never knew how to deal with responsibility. He always waited for someone to solve it for him. He always waited for me to solve it. And then came the moment that tightened my chest the most. The grandchildren. I saw little Noah holding the teddy bear, looking around as if trying to understand why the adults were so tense. I saw Ellie asking her aunt something, who didn't pay attention. I saw the teenager Lily looking at her cell phone, annoyed because she would have to leave the hotel ahead of time. And finally, Mariana. She appeared in the lobby looking for someone. When he found me up there, he raised his hand slowly, as if to say, "I am here," and I got back up. Brandon tried to grab her by the arm. I saw it. He said something, insisted, pointed to the door, to the car, to her suitcase. Mariana shook her head and pulled her arm back. She said something short, firm, direct. He became static. His mouth moved slowly, as if he had been slapped invisibly. Miguel got close to the two, offering help, signaling where the group's bags were. And then Mariana went up the stairs to the side entrance. I couldn't hear her, but I heard it with my eyes. She chose to stay with me. That's it. It gave me a strength that I didn't know I had anymore. There are moments in life that are small on the outside, but giant on the inside. And I feel like you'll understand very well when I say that. That phrase slipped through my mouth while I was still watching my family leaving the hotel. It's just that there are things that seem simple to those who see them from afar, but those who have lived them know their dimension. If you've ever been through a moment like this, where you finally put a limit after years of fading away, I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. I saw the bags being piled up in the luggage cart. I saw Melissa slamming the car door. I saw Brandon adjusting his glasses, frustrated. I saw David carrying 2 backpacks from his children as if carrying the weight of his own past. I saw Ellie's confused expression, Noah's sad look, Lily's forced indifference. There was no audience. There was no show. There was only the truth. The ungrateful left through the same door through which they entered, but this time without the easy laughter, without the relief of being able to ignore me. They walked out the door knowing that they were no longer the owners of my silence. And I stood there on the porch, motionless, until their car disappeared in the parking lot. It was then that I felt something inside me fit together, like a bone that finally returns to place after years of displacement. I didn't drive them out of hatred. I only returned the abandonment they gave me. I returned it in the same measure, but with dignity. For the first time in decades, I was taking care of myself. And when I turned inside room 512, my heart beating in peace, I realized that the hardest part was over, but the most important was yet to come. Because that late afternoon, as the Gulf breeze blew through the window, I finally picked up the phone to make the last call, the one that would change everything for good. Want to know who I called? It's best to take a deep breath, because the next part, it is the one that no one in my family ever imagined facing. As they walked down the stairs of the hotel carrying their own bags, I sat on the edge of the bed, holding a blank sheet of paper. The pen trembled between my fingers, but it wasn't weakness. It was something it would take me many years to recognize in myself: courage. Outside, the muffled sound of the car engine reached the balcony, and for a moment, I closed my eyes just to listen. There was crying. There were whispers. There was that hurried conversation that only those who are trying to justify the unjustifiable know well. But inside, in room 512, there was silence. And silence this time was my ally. I heard Anna crying before I even realized that her car had the trunk open. It was a low, contained, almost childlike cry. A cry of someone who never expected to be contradicted. She was saying something to David, and I could imagine the scene without even seeing it. Her hand covering her face, her breathing quick, the sobs she tried to hide from her daughter. Melissa, on the other hand, was pure poison. He walked from one side to the other, cell phone in his ear, thin and angry voice, saying phrases like, "She freaked out. This is emotional abuse. I'm going to sue this woman, you'll see." It was almost ironic. I, who spent my life holding me, was now accused of freaking out because I finally said enough. Brandon. Ah, my Brandon. He was standing by the car, arms crossed, head bowed, like a scolded boy who doesn't know if he's angrier at the one who called him to reason or at himself for being caught. He didn't speak. He just took a deep breath, as if trying to organize his thoughts, as if he were in front of an invisible mirror that reflected not only that trip, but the last years of his life. His life, my life. The distance that grew silently between us, until it became an abyss. David was the only one who had the courage to ask, even if only to Tasha, almost in a whisper, "Did we overreact?" I could see, even from a distance, that Tasha didn't answer. She just shrugged, turning her face and wiping away a tear with her fingertips. Maybe it was shame. Maybe regret. Maybe just fear of the consequences. But for the first time, they were feeling something they had never felt before, the pain of losing access to me. Inside the room, I sat up straight, adjusted my glasses on my face, and wrote on the paper, "You only remember me when you need to." The words came out as if they had been written in my soul for years. I continued. For 30 years, I was a mother, a seamstress, a counselor, a nanny, a driver, a nurse. I went to the ground where you stepped when you were falling. I was the shoulder where you cried, the lap where you rested. And yet, no one asked me if I needed a hug too. The tears began to fall, but they were warm, soft, almost soft. They were not tears of weakness. They were tears of deliverance. It was like taking off a heavy coat that I had carried for decades without realizing it. With each line I wrote, I moved a little further away from the woman who accepted everything quietly, and I approached the woman who finally saw herself as human, not as a resource. Outside, Melissa was still gesticulating, annoyed, talking to someone about lawyers and rights. Anna tried to gather the children's toys in the trunk while wiping her face. David now held the steering wheel, but would not start the car. Brandon looked up at the building, trying to guess which window I was in. He looked for long seconds, as if waiting for me to appear. As if he was waiting for a gesture, a word, an apology. I didn't show up. I ended the letter with a sentence that came out on its own, effortlessly, without planning. Today, you lost a hotel room, but I lost the fear of being forgotten. Fold the sheet carefully, as if folding an ancient story. I put it inside the drawer of the nightstand, not for them, for me, so that I would never again tell myself that I needed to accept less than I deserved. While I was putting the letter away, I noticed something curious. Outside, the voices were diminishing, until silence took over again. It was as if their fall had been subtle, silent, inevitable. There was no screaming. There was no war. There was only consequence. The consequence of years of neglect, of small betrayals, of abandonment disguised as routine. The consequence of having thought that a mother can be used without her heart ever learning to defend itself. The letter was there, in the drawer, as an intimate declaration that I would no longer be that erased woman. But there was still one thing I needed to do before I could move on. Something that would change more than just that trip. I took a deep breath and sat on the edge of the bed again, my heart calm but awake, because the most important decision, I hadn't taken it yet, and it was coming, as sure as the waves of that sea that crashed, repeated and constant, deep down. And you'll see, the next part. It's where everything really changes. What choice does a woman make after finally breaking free? The taxi arrived at the door of the hotel shortly after 2 in the afternoon, and I went down the stairs slowly, feeling the wind coming from the sea hit my face as if to remind me that I was still alive, whole, despite everything. Mariana walked beside me, carrying the small suitcase that she had packed herself, and when the driver opened the door for us, I realized that my hands were calm, without trembling, as if my body knew that this departure was not an escape. It was a choice. The car left Galveston behind via the coastal highway, and for the first time in many years, I didn't look back looking for anyone. I didn't wait for the phone to ring. I didn't feel that old anguish of, did I do too much? Was I harsh? Should I have tried one more time? No. I just leaned my head against the glass and let the path happen. When we arrived in Seabrook, the boutique hotel felt almost like a hideaway. Small, quiet, with white balconies, the smell of lemon and wood, and a garden full of lavender swaying in the breeze. We took the room on the second floor, and right after unpacking, we went down to the restaurant. Their coffee came in a porcelain pot, a simple detail, but one that made me smile. I spent years serving coffee in a chipped mug to get it all done, and there, in front of that tidy table, I felt as if someone was saying, "Now it's your turn." Mariana noticed my smile and smiled too, in the way that only grandchildren can, as if she saw what I didn't say. After breakfast, we walked along the beach, and I took off my shoes. She laughed and asked, "Grandma, what are you doing?" I just replied, experiencing lightness. The sand was hot, fine, soft, and I felt no shame in walking slowly, in letting the waves wet the hem of my pants, in existing in my own time. Later in the afternoon, we went back to the room, and I prepared the pie dough as I taught my grandmother, and then my mother, and then my children, although they were never really interested. Mariana watched attentively, with that beautiful curiosity of someone who knows she is learning something that carries history. "The perfect crust begins in silence," I said, kneading slowly, in the patience of not forcing anything. She laughed, "Just like you?" And I laughed together, not at the joke, but at the truth that came along with it. While the pie baked, we sat on the porch. The evening light turned everything golden, as if the day was saying goodbye with kindness. It was then that Mariana asked, almost in a whisper, "Grandma, do you think they'll call?" I was silent for a few seconds, not because it hurt, but because I finally had the right answer. "I don't wait any longer," I replied. "I'll wait for myself." She tilted her head, trying to understand, and I continued. "We spend our lives waiting for people to do for us what they've never done. We expect you to see what you have ignored, to feel what you have not felt, to change what you have never even acknowledged. I don't want to live like this anymore. I don't take them mad at me, just rest. Now, daughter, who I hope for is myself. I wait for my decisions, my choices, my days in peace, and if one day they understand, let them come out of will, not out of guilt." Mariana stared at the sea for a while, her eyes full of that mixture of love and sadness that only those who grow up before their time know. "I'm proud of you," she said, and this sentence, that phrase was worth more than any request for forgiveness that my children could ever invent. After dinner, we sat on the hotel deck for a while, listening to the sound of the waves instead of the sound of my family's arguments. And I realized that, in that simple place, in that almost sacred calm, I was tasting something I never had before, the feeling of not having to insist where there was no reciprocity. That night, before going to sleep, I looked out the window of room 204, not as big as the 512, but much more mine, and thanked him in silence. I thanked him for the courage that took a long time to arrive, but it arrived. I thanked her for Mariana, my loyal girl. I thanked him for finally understanding that love without respect is not love. It's habit. But as I turned off the lamp, a question came like a whisper of the wind, and I felt that it needed to be answered, even if only inside me. Had that trip really been the end of the story, or just the beginning of something much bigger? Because deep down, I knew there was still one last decision I needed to make, and this, no one would predict it. Today, as the sun sets behind the sea line here in Seabrook, I sit on the porch with my cup of hot tea in my hands and watch the sky change color, as if someone is calmly painting all the shades that my life still has. I see Mariana laughing in the garden, running after a puppy that appeared here as if it had been sent just to get that smile out of me that I thought would never come back. And looking at this scene so simple, so sweet, I realized that it is here, right here, that my story finds peace. Because my children, they went their ways. In a few days, they tried to call me, not to ask for forgiveness, but to understand what went wrong. I listened, serenely, and answered only what my heart allowed. I'm fine. Today I take care of myself. David sent a short message, thanking him for the creation, and saying that he needed to get my head organized. Anna apologized sheepishly, and I accepted it. Not for her, but for me. Melissa didn't say anything, as she always preferred noise to silence. And Brandon, well, it slowly reappeared. First a short message, then a shaky audio, until one day he asked if he could visit me, and I said yes, but I asked him to come alone, with an unarmed heart. He came, found a different mother, and cried softly on the porch as he said he didn't know he had gone so far in the wrong direction. I heard him, not with the old pain, but with that calm that only those who have risen from the bottom know how to have. I don't know what we will be like in the future, but I know that I am no longer the ground that carried everyone. It's just me, and that's enough now. This story taught me something that you may also need to hear. We spend our lives believing that to love is to never let go. But sometimes, to love is to let go where it hurts, to hold where it makes sense. I didn't have to defeat anyone. The only battle I won was against the guilt of thinking that I had to endure everything to be worthy of love. Today, I understand that respect is not requested, it is deserved. That presence is not begged, it is exchanged. And that when we stop running after those who abandon us, the heart finds space to breathe, to get back on its feet, to be home again. But this time, a house where we fit first. And if you've stayed with me this far, listening to this story of a lady who took a lifetime to realize her own worth, I want to thank you. You can't imagine how much your company heats up, even from afar. If this story touched you in any way, leave a like. It's like a silent hug that comes from the other side of the screen and tells me that I didn't tell this alone. And if you want to come back to hear other stories, sign up, honey. The registration is like an invitation for us to meet again at the next cafe, calmly, with truth, with that good warmth of conversation that life still allows. Also tell me from which city you are listening to me. I love to imagine where my voice is going, in which room, on which balcony, in which heart. And, if you can, activate the bell, so you don't lose it when the coffee is brewed again. Now, before closing this window, stay with me for a moment longer. Don't go away yet. Listen to the next real story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.